On the show today, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy visits the White House.
Russia hopes once more to use winter as a weapon against the people of Ukraine. But as I discussed with President Zelenskyy, the people of Ukraine are steeled for this struggle ahead. And the United States is going to continue to stand with you.
Plus, Kenyan troops are headed to Haiti.
Kenya will lead a multinational effort of at least 1,000 soldiers to help restore peace. So far, Jamaica and the Bahamas have offered to assist Kenya.
And later, the relationship between Beijing and Damascus is strengthening, while the Ottawa-New Delhi relationship is in trouble. Today is Friday, September 22nd, and this is VOA's International Edition. From VOA headquarters in Washington, I'm Steve Karish. Timed to coincide with Zelensky's visit, the United States government on Thursday announced that it's sending an additional $325 million worth of weapons, including missiles, rockets, and artillery rounds to Kyiv for its defensive war against Russia. Details from VOA's chief national correspondent Steve Herman in Washington.
After stopping on Thursday on Capitol Hill and at the Pentagon, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy held talks at the White House with President Joe Biden, who said Russia alone stands in the way of peace in Ukraine.
Russia hopes once more to use winter as a weapon against the people of Ukraine. But as I discussed with President Zelenskyy, the people of Ukraine are steeled for this struggle ahead, and the United States is going to continue to stand with you.
The Ukrainian president expressed his appreciation for the latest package of U.S. military aid.
It has exactly what our soldiers need now.
Zelenskyy has also been pushing for the United States to supply his military with long-range guided missiles capable of striking behind Russian front lines. Those weapons, known as ATACMS, are not in this latest round of supplies. Meanwhile, some Republican lawmakers say they do not want to authorize an additional $24 billion in military and humanitarian aid for Ukraine, noting a lack of significant progress against Russia by the Ukrainian army. Zelenskyy is quoted as telling senators earlier in the day, "If we don't get the aid, we will lose the war." Steve Herman, VOA News, Washington.
And here are some other stories we're following from around the world. The official panel responsible for organizing elections in Pakistan announced on Thursday that the much-awaited national parliamentary polls will take place in the last week of January, ending uncertainty about the fate of the electoral process. Somali Prime Minister Hamza Abdi Barre said Thursday that his government is appealing for more international support in its long-running war against al-Shabaab militants. He told VOA that he will appeal to the UN General Assembly this weekend about removing an international arms embargo so that Somalia is capable of eliminating al-Shabaab. A contractor working for the U.S. government has been arrested on espionage charges, accused of providing a foreign country classified information. Abraham Teklu Lema, who is originally from Ethiopia, is accused of using an encrypted messaging application to transmit maps, photographs, and satellite imagery to that foreign government. This according to court documents. World leaders are hoping to soon send Kenyan troops to Haiti to quell gang violence there. Meeting on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, Secretary of State Antony Blinken addressed the issue with Kenyan President William Ruto. But the idea makes some Haitians uneasy. VOA's senior Washington correspondent Carolyn Prosciutti brings us the latest.
Violence in Haiti. Gangs are said to control 80% of the nation's capital in Port-au-Prince. Homes burned, schools closed, Haitians displaced. But now assistance from foreign troops. Kenya will lead a multinational effort of at least 1,000 soldiers to help restore peace. So far, Jamaica and the Bahamas have offered to assist Kenya.
Mr. President, so good to see you.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken walks across the room to shake the hand of Kenyan President William Ruto Thursday at the United Nations. just a few hours before Ruto said this before the UN General Assembly.
The cry of our brothers and sisters who were the first people to win their struggle for freedom from colonial tyranny has reached our ears and touched our hearts.
Also at the UN, an advisory group to discuss the economic and social impact of the violence. This just 2 days after U.S. President Joe Biden addressed the UN General Assembly with these words.
I call on the Security Council to authorize this mission now. The people of Haiti cannot wait much longer.
But the idea of a UN multinational force worries some New York Haitians who remember the 2010 Nepalese UN force that brought cholera to their country. At a Creole restaurant in Manhattan, VOA spoke with Wesley Jean Simon.
The gang violence is resonated in Haiti, and Haitians created it, so we need to fix it ourselves.
And Rose Marilyn.
The thing that's going on with the country, there's no safety, especially after the president got assassinated, so nobody really feels safe.
Late Friday, Haitian Prime Minister Ariel Henry will address the United Nations General Assembly. At the same time, Haitians plan to protest his presence here in the city block that leads to the United Nations. The Security Council is expected to vote next week on sending the multinational force from Kenya to Haiti. Carolyn Presutti, VOA News at the United Nations.
From Washington, it's VOA's International Edition. I'm Steve Karish. VOA is on the scene in the mountains of Morocco. We check in on a school after the devastating earthquake. That story coming up soon. Now, a look at news, where it comes from and how it's made. As Russia's war in Ukraine is discussed and even argued over at the UN General Assembly, reporters like Dmytro Apochenko have an important role to play in keeping Ukrainian audiences informed. VOA's Christina Casiedo-Smith caught up with him in New York.
Even with 5 years' experience as a foreign correspondent, Ukrainian journalist Dmitry Anopchenko says nothing could have prepared him for covering a war in his own country. With President Volodymyr Zelenskyy addressing the UN General Assembly in person, Anopchenko has a full day of work and a pressing question.
The main question for my audience, for all the Ukrainians, how Zelenskyy and how the US administration understands the moment when the war will stop. It is what I'm intending to ask President Zelenskyy and President Biden if I will have a chance.
The reporter works for Inter TV channel, but since the full invasion, 6 of Ukraine's main broadcasters, including Inter TV channel, have integrated to feed a non-stop news cycle. Back in Kyiv, editor-in-chief Victoria Naidionova described their priorities.
Speaking for all journalists is, of course, information verification. To verify information, wait until final confirmation of any information.
Leading a newsroom at this time is tough.
For me as the editor-in-chief, the biggest challenge is trying to maintain a kind of balance between my duty to preserve the life and health of journalists and at the same time to cover events that are happening on the front line.
But covering the UN General Assembly is just one of many hats Anopchenko wears. The journalist also covers the Pentagon, U.S. State Department, White House, and Congress, and provides an antidote to the flood of Russian propaganda online.
The Russian sources, they try to hide themselves. They are reporting like it's Ukrainian media or some Ukrainian journalist. They are telling our army, our country, about Ukraine.
More than a year into the war, Moscow continues to deploy false and misleading information about the conflict, an Atlantic Council report found.
That is why I have to, not the double check, but triple check the information with the sources, with the officials, because I don't have to be like them.
Still, there is one story the Ukrainian journalist is looking forward to covering: the end of the conflict.
Gosh, it will be so emotional. I'm even afraid to think about this. I hope it will be soon. I hope it will be as soon as possible because everyone, I'll tell you, honestly, we're so tired living every moment and waiting that someone you love will not be alive tomorrow.
Until that moment, Anopchenko will keep doing what he does best, reporting on developments for his audience. Cristina Caicedo-Smith, VOA News, New York.
And in other news, Fox Broadcast Network founder Rupert Murdoch is stepping down as the leader of Fox and News Corp. The AP's Margie Zaraletta has that story.
Fox says 92-year-old Rupert Murdoch will become chairman emeritus of both Fox and News Corp. Murdoch started with one newspaper in Australia that he inherited, and he created the first network to successfully challenge ABC, CBS, and NBC. Murdoch also founded Fox News Channel in 1996. His son Lachlan will become chairman, as well as continue to serve as chief executive officer. Murdoch says he will be involved every day in the contest of ideas in his new role. Lachlan Murdoch says his father will continue to provide valued counsel to both companies. I'm Archie Zaraletta.
It's no secret that the relationship between India and China has been on the rocks the past couple of days. We'll get an update on that in a moment. One diplomatic relationship that appears to be strengthening, however, is the relationship between Syria and China. Both countries are skeptical of America and Western power, and as Syrian President Bashar al-Assad seeks to re-enter the international community, he goes to Hangzhou in China's east. Reuters' Rachel Judah has more.
Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has touched down in China, kicking off his first visit to the country since 2004, as he makes further strides to end more than a decade of diplomatic isolation under Western sanctions. While there, Assad is set to attend the opening ceremony of the Asian Games, along with more than a dozen foreign dignitaries. He will then lead a delegation for meetings in several Chinese cities. He will also meet President Xi Jinping. Being seen with China's president at a regional gathering should add further legitimacy to Assad's campaign to return to the world stage. Syria joined China's Belt and Road Initiative last year and was welcomed back into the Arab League in May. Faced with a crippled economy and little to show so far from his efforts to rebuild ties with Arab states, Assad is keen for financial support. But any Chinese or other investment in Syria risks entangling an investor in US sanctions under the 2020 Caesar Act that can freeze the assets of anyone dealing with Syria. China, like Syria's main backers, Russia and Iran, has maintained relations with Damascus, as others isolated Assad over his crackdown when protests first erupted in 2011. Assad's visit to China is one of his longest spells abroad since the civil war flared, which has claimed more than 500,000 lives. Syria, a small oil producer, holds strategic significance for China. It lies between Iraq, a major oil supplier to China, and Turkey, the terminus of economic corridors stretching across Asia into Europe. But analysts doubt Chinese firms are considering returning to Syria, given its poor security and dire financial situation.
Rachel Judah of Reuters with that story for us. And as I mentioned, the Canadian and Indian relationship is in peril. This after the Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, accused the Indian government of assassinating a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil. He was someone the Indians had said was a terrorist. In the latest escalation, India has suspended visa services for Canadian citizens as the rift between the two countries deepens. AP correspondent Karen Chamas reports.
The rise in tensions come after Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau this week said India may have been involved in the killing of a Canadian citizen. Trudeau believes India was involved in the assassination of Sikh separatist Hardeep Singh Nijjar, who had been wanted by India for years. The bombshell allegation from Trudeau set off a diplomatic tit-for-tat, as each country expelled a diplomat. India denied the claim and called it absurd. Indian External Affairs Ministry spokesperson Arindam Bagchi confirmed a temporary suspension of all visa services for Canadians.
Accordingly, our High Commission and consulates are temporarily unable to process visa applications.
The suspension means that Canadians who don't already have visas will not be able to travel to India until services resume. I'm Karen Chamas.
Nigerian unions are threatening to strike, demanding the reinstatement of fuel subsidies the government ended in May. The Nigerian Labour Congress, which represents hundreds of thousands of workers, is asking the government to reverse its decision or introduce measures that would help citizens cope with the soaring food and transportation costs. Timothy Obezu reports from Abuja.
Pam Emmanuel opened his barbershop 12 years ago in his hometown in Central Plateau State. He relocated to Abuja a few years ago in a bid to expand his business. But recently, he says, he has been struggling to make a profit.
Since the government removed the fuel subsidy, the price of fuel has increased and everything in the market has also increased. So the only thing we can do is to meet up. So we have to increase our prices.
The Nigerian government had subsidized fuel prices for decades. In May, President Bola Tinubu shut down the program.
The first subsidy is gone.
That decision more than tripled the price of gas and sent food and transportation costs through the roof. The cost increase also made it expensive to run the generators that many Nigerian households and businesses depend on when the erratic power supply shuts off. Barbara Pam Emmanuel wants the government to take action.
I'm just pleading the government to do something about it. They should look into it. First is the masses, not them themselves. So they should have conscience.
President Tinubu embarked on some of Nigeria's boldest reforms in decades to grow the country's struggling economy and address corruption. He also floated the national currency against the dollar and other global currencies to eliminate multiple exchange rates. But the naira has fallen to historic lows since then, and his policies are drawing strong criticism from Nigerian labor unions. The Nigerian Labour Congress, NLC, which represents hundreds of thousands of workers, wants authorities to revert to the previous status quo, review salaries for its members, and introduce cheaper, gas-powered mass transport systems to reduce workers' transportation costs. Last month, the NLC led thousands to the streets in protest, calling the government's policies anti-poor. This week, a meeting between the National Executive Council of the Workers' Union and government officials ended in a deadlock. 2 weeks ago, the NLC gave the government 2 weeks to reverse its policies. NLC spokesman Benson Upa says the deadline is Friday.
Subsidy service is not a burden to the nation. It is those who exploit the window of subsidy to create, it is those people that create the burden. And the president in his speech graciously acknowledged the existence of a cabal. But instead of dealing with that cabal, he chose to deal with us, the innocent, in fact, the victims. If at the end of the 14 working day ultimatum, its lawful demands are not met, it will embark on an indefinite strike action. The NEC has now rescinded that decision.
Nigerian authorities are asking for more time to fix the problem. Simon Lalong is Nigeria's Labour and Employment Minister.
I must say that our meeting was very robust and we had a very, very fruitful meeting. But at the end of the day, many of those items that we left are still for consideration.
The World Bank says Nigeria could save $5.1 billion this year from its economic reforms. At the same time, it warns that more than 7 million citizens could be pushed into poverty if the subsidy removal is not properly managed. Timothy Obiezu, VOA News, Abuja, Nigeria.
And finally, today, children are returning to class in Morocco's Atlas Mountains, less than 2 weeks after a massive earthquake killed and injured thousands of people and razed whole villages. With about 600 area schools destroyed, many students will be studying in tents or in the nearest city, Marrakesh. Lisa Bryant reports from the town of Amizmiz.
Less than 2 weeks ago, Atlas Primary School in Amizmiz was filled with children. Nearly 500 kids studied here. At least 8 died during the late-night earthquake as they slept in homes nearby. Lives and futures suddenly halted. Imad Moulay Othman's children studied here. His dad worked as a school janitor. Othman says he's hoping for a speedy solution for the kids to get back to studying. The family sleeps outside. They're fearful of another earthquake. Othman's children are still traumatized by the quake, which killed one of their classmates. In this poor mountainous region, education can be a ticket to a better life. Teacher Tissam Termi says kids are not dropping out of school like they used to. She says parents are aware of the importance of education. Tissam Termi teaches and lives at a remote village school. Her leg was broken when a classroom wall collapsed during the quake, which also killed 4 of her students. Some of the dead are buried at this cemetery in Amizmiz. He says what's important now is daily survival. Education comes after. Atlas Primary would have celebrated its 100th birthday in a couple of years. Now its pupils and the region face the difficult task of rebuilding and moving on. Lisa Bryant for VOA News, Amizmiz, Morocco.
And that's going to wrap it up for us today. This has been International Edition on the Voice of America. On behalf of everyone at VOA, thanks for joining us. For pictures, stories, videos, and more, follow VOA News on your favorite social media platform and online at voanews.com. Until next time, I'm Steve Karish in Washington. Stay safe and have a great day.
Next, an editorial reflecting the views of the United States government.
The fighting in Sudan continues to severely impact South Sudan's resources and humanitarian needs due to more than 250,000 returnees and refugees seeking refuge in border towns and internally displaced persons camps, said U.S. Ambassador Robert Wood, UN Alternative Representative for Special Political Affairs.
An additional 26,000 South Sudanese displaced persons have fled violence and food insecurity in Ethiopia's refugee camps, further straining resources and food supply.
The United States remains gravely concerned over the congestion and overcrowding in border towns such as Renk and internally displaced persons camps, as well as the lack of adequate shelter and medical aid for displaced persons. Ambassador Wood strongly urged the United Nations mission in South Sudan, the transitional government, and humanitarian partners to strengthen efforts to provide returnees and displaced persons sufficient shelter, food, medical, and relocation services. He also urged parties to continue to provide assistance and services to host communities and those displaced less recently to ensure a balanced approach that takes into account the needs of all groups. The United States remains disappointed with the lack of progress by the transitional government of South Sudan's implementation of the 2018 peace agreement and the 2022 roadmap, said Ambassador Wood.
With only 15 months remaining until the December 2024 elections, it is not evident South Sudan will be prepared to hold elections under conditions consistent with President Kiir's commitments. Open political space for a genuine campaign free of intimidation and violence does not exist. The transitional government has failed to detail the budget revenue it will dedicate to electoral administrative tasks, and needed legislation has not been passed.
Sexual violence remains an ongoing issue that must be addressed, warned Ambassador Wood.
This reporting period highlighted 18 cases of conflict-related sexual violence, including 12 women, 8 girls, and 1 man. The United States strongly condemns any form of gender-based violence. We call on the government to take immediate steps to strengthen rule of law institutions and increase survivors' access to services.
The transitional government must seize this opportunity to give the South Sudanese people a hopeful future, said Ambassador Wood. The people of South Sudan deserve to live without violence, to feel safe, and to contribute to the betterment of their country.
That was an editorial reflecting the views of the United States government.